Welcome to episode 52 of Fizzy's Wacky World of Wrestling. My name is William Fitzpatrick, and wow, we've already been 9 episodes into the new format change, and I didn't even realize we were doing a new format change until the last episode. But for those of you who are tuning in for the very first time, or for those of you who are now returning once again, welcome back to Fizzy's Wacky World of Wrestling. Today's episode is of Screaming Sands and Perilous Pitfalls, the 52nd episode of the series. Short bio, I've been doing this series for over 6 years at this point. I believe I started off in 2013, 2014, 2015. I did a little bit of time off in 2015. 2016 didn't do any podcasting involving Wacky World, but I did do other podcasts like Cage Side Speaks. 2017 revived the podcast. 2018, now we're into our, I believe, either 13th or 14th episode of the series 2 of Wacky World of Wrestling. So 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18. Yes, 6 years. 6 years of wacky, kinda, because I did take a year off from Wacky World of Wrestling because of scheduling related things. But we are back again, or I'm back again, with once again my modified logo. I still need to get this dang thing centered right. Actually, it is properly centered on the one side of my screen, but it's not on this broadcast at this point. But anywho, it's Screaming Sands and Perilous Pitfall times. Or Perilous Pitfalls. So once again, this is yet another random edition of Wacky World of Wrestling. Again, this is a podcast that focuses on a wide variety of things in the world of professional wrestling, and also sometimes branches out of professional wrestling to cover other topics, such as like the world of professional sumo. Which, surprisingly, if you think about it, has actually had a more topsy-turvy year than professional wrestling usually does. But I'll get into that. I think actually I'll do a sumo update on this particular episode because some of you are actually interested in that topic. But to start things off, well, we are a couple weeks away from WWE doing two pay-per-views, two specialty pay-per-views. The second of their 10-year arranged marriage deal with the KSA, which is WWE Crown Jewel, which has become under increased scrutiny because of political politics and a possible assassination of a former Saudi official. Oops. You know, guys, you probably should have planned this out a little bit more in advance. I mean, you already have a WWE pay-per-view coming in a couple weeks. I know that Vince McMahon is going to literally tear the sand dunes apart because he's Satan and he does these sorts of things, but I'm not sure copying Vince McMahon tactics is the best solution when dealing with dissidents, with political dissidents, in all honesty. But then again, I'm just me. So, the long story short about this particular dealing is I'm not exactly sure if it was the KSA that approached WWE with this deal or arranged marriage, or WWE approached the KSA, which is the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia in short. And there's been a lot of discussion points and talking points and infighting about what about this or that or the other thing. And I'm like, I'm sitting back and I've been enjoying the popcorn of this insanity that is yet another incident involving WWE and yet another incident involving a company that has, or government or kingdom that has absolutely no idea what kind of madness they're going to get themselves into by signing any kind of deal with Satan, which often happens when you are in a situation where you're trying to promote an event and then you suddenly realize we just penned a deal with a bunch of crazy Americans who are somehow even more crazier than the average of an American. And I'm from the US, so I'm kind of including myself in that average. But regardless, there's been all sorts of talking points about this particular issue over the last couple of weeks, and it's been all sorts of crazy insanity and everybody trying to preach their brand of political politics or this, that, and the other thing about it. And I've taken a more neutral stance on this particular issue because, one, we need to wait for all the details to come out about this beforehand, before even jumping to conclusions. And second, If the KSA was the one that decided to approach WWE with this 45 to 55 million in cold hard cash that is not tied to anything deal, then it really is on their heads that they're trying to do a deal with a company that is well known for being, well, cartoonishly, laughably evil in most instances. As we've seen in the history of professional wrestling, but even they are basically Candyland compared to everybody else in the entertainment industry. They're the nice tip of the iceberg. Then there's the rest of the entertainment industry, which is like a mook horror show of to end all mook horror shows. And if you thought that the shifting sands and screaming sands and perilous pitfalls refer to this deal, no, it's not necessarily including that in here. It's actually including we're going broad spectrum. I'm going a broad spectrum in the world of professional wrestling, and I'm going to be talking about some things that I like and I particularly like to talk about. And well, some of you might get interested in it, and others might decide to do the whole thing of copying my picture, printing it out, and starting to throw various sharp objects at it. Which, feel free to do so if you want to. I'm sure by the end of this broadcast, there's going to be some disagreeing talking points and whatnot. And obviously, the first thing is, why am I being neutral about this? Have any of you actually read a history book about Arabia? Have any of you actually read a history book about the Arab province and how many insane, crazy things have happened over the years? I mean, the plane ride from hell could basically be considered maybe 150th in the craziest things that have happened in that desert. This deal between WWE and the KSA might actually make the top 10, though, because they didn't think that WWE would be bringing the Vari brothers, who are Iranian, into Saudi Arabia to wave an Iranian flag on their show. That should have been the moment that they realized, even with all the fanciest red couches in the world, this was going to be very awkward. And awkward this deal has become. Part of me is thinking at this point in time that this whole political issue thing was to actually cause some issue with the Vision 2037. Now, as much as everybody agrees that it's pretty much propaganda, at least they're being honest about their propaganda at this point, which for a lot of nations, it's surprising. Yes, there have been moderate improvements in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. Yes, there have also been still a lot of issues in that government, but folks, there are issues in every government, in every city, in every province. There's like a parade of issues everywhere. So I'm like, as much as I don't want to compare this to apples and oranges, all I have to look at it from this perspective is either the KSA signed a really bad deal with WWE, where they are now stuck with WWE promoting their propaganda, which in of itself is rather hysterical because you're trusting Vince and the WWE video production team to not mess this up for you. You're trusting an American foreigner with your propaganda. Admittedly, we did some really good World War II propaganda in the 1940s. Maybe they're thinking that the same lightning will strike twice, I guess. But the reality is, in this situation, is that, and the thing that I've seen, and I'm going to be turning off this topic for a sec, is that if they were the ones that brought this deal forward to WWE, then it's on their heads that it is falling apart as badly as it is. And if WWE approached the KSA, well, okay, that's just a business dealing. Okay, you want to make good, and you want to keep every province in that area, which have roving bands of maniacs, happy. You know, you don't want to end up in a situation where you're literally in Lawrence of Arabia and there's a roving band of gangs that are suddenly surrounding you. And I know that there have been people who've been voicing their concern about going to this show. I think they'll be fine. Professional wrestlers statistically actually have the smallest fatality rates out of any group that travels around the world because they're professional wrestlers. They're in some provinces literally worshipped as gods. Quite literally and figuratively, in fact, if you look through the biblical human history of professional wrestling in the ancient times to modern day. where guys like, let me think here, like the Mighty Atom or Gaman Singh or all of the others, who were wrestlers back in the olden days of professional wrestling, they weren't bothered, internationally. And now we move into the other topic, which everybody is. I've talked about this a couple of times beforehand. Everybody seems to view WWE as this some kind of mega monopoly, this big business, too big to fail. And me, in my studying of business from the books of the autobiography of Lee Iacocca, and because of the fact that I actually run a small business selling microgreens to restaurants, it got me interested in that topic because I felt as though WWE a monopoly. They control the world of wrestling, Fizzy. They are all there. Again, this is the kind of gibberish that I constantly have to hear from just by reading the Twitters or the Reddits or any other wrestling media storytelling article that has been on this subject. That WWE is some kind of ginormous monopoly and it's too big to fail, or this or that or the other thing, and it's consuming the life of wrestling and all this other kind of stuff. Have you not seen the screw ups that everybody else has been doing this year? 2018 has been the year of let me stand on top of the mountain while there's a lightning storm happening, and let me hold up this giant pointy sword. And at this point, I'll be imbued with magical powers, and I will be able to control the world of professional wrestling. No, you're not going to control the world of professional wrestling. All you're going to do is you're going to end up fried like a bacon sandwich. And then somebody else is going to get the insane idea wielding a sword while wearing heavy iron chain armor. Where you're going to even end up as a more cooked version of a bacon sandwich. And that's the thing at this point. You have everybody trying to Game of Thrones one another at this point in the wrestling world, be it promoters, be it wrestlers, be it wrestling personalities. I've said about this before, and I've talked about this a couple of times. This is where the screaming sands, where everybody gets blinded by the dust of a sandstorm, and the perilous pitfalls of everybody saying that WWE is this, WWE is that, and WWE is this other thing. Vince right now is focused on his fantasy football league and really isn't all that interested. He's already got these deals in place. It's like, okay, let's just run through the contract here, regardless of the negative PR or not. That's how he's thinking about this. And WWE isn't a monopoly. It's a microeconomy. There's a major difference between the two. A monopoly is somebody who has total control over 100% of the entirety of the industry or the ecosystem. WWE barely controls like 50% of it, even less if you think about it, because every single industry that they run is run by a completely different crew, by a completely different set of individuals who are all maybe answering to Vince, maybe not. Because there's all this delusion and all of this smoke and mirrors tricks a la the Wizard of Oz to question is Vince in total control, which I've sincerely doubted for the last several years. Sure, Vince is an obsessive compulsive control freak who basically could beat the devil at chess, but at the same time, it's not like we're in 1984 and everybody's got security cameras and is watching what everybody is doing. You've seen what's happened in the Nation of Isengard, the Cult of Full Sail, and NXT. They've got their own ecosystem, they've got their own wrestlers, and they've got their own brands and storylines. And speaking of which, I've actually been looking at the spoilers of NXT as of late. I am tempted seriously not to laugh, and also tempted not to once again do the I told you so thing regarding a certain feud and angle, but I hate to say I told you so, and I hate being right, but I told you so. And for those of you who may be thinking about the whole spoiler thing, they may have just revealed who Aleister Black's attacker was, the one who I may have correctly predicted when when the angle happened. Oh, Tomas! Oh, dear Aleister Black, you're not facing against Tommaso Ciampa. You're facing against Psycho Johnny. Yep, Psycho Johnny is actually going to become a thing. Oh boy. A lot of you seem to have this opinion that Johnny Gargano is a babyface again, which I continuously am confused by because Johnny is absolutely unlikable. But at the same time, people are saying WWE is this massive monopoly and controls everything about the world of wrestling. Like, no, WWE, like everybody else, is barely hanging on to what they have. And the reason why they are getting into these monopoly situations is because the local infrastructure is so gosh dang incompetent at just basic business practices that they themselves have to ask WWE to literally bail them out like a like a stock market. They have become the Federal Reserve. WWE has become the Federal Reserve for wrestling promotions to get themselves bailed out. Look what happened to ECW in 1997. They were short on cash. They were having all of these legal issues with the various pay-per-view providers, and Vince bailed them out. Vince isn't against other forms of wrestling showing up. Heck, it makes his job easier if people are actually doing things competently for once, which is a common problem in the world of professional wrestling, is that you have the free various issues. The free overall issues with professional wrestling are theater, sports, and entertainment. Each of these free things is directly jamming themselves like arrows during a siege warfare against a pikeman who has free arrows jammed into his chest. The first is feeder. I have experience dealing with community feeder types. These are the type of people that will want to do every sort of event imaginable, who have this grand, ambitious, creative vision. Gee, you hear that a lot about these, the armchair fantasy football bookers. They have all these fantasy visions, but they don't have the budget and they don't have the artistry or the talent around them to make that vision a tantalizing reality. And yes, that is completely 100% intentional to make this seem as creepy as possible, because it literally is creepy as possible. Because when you're dealing with feeder people are nuts. And they will take advantage of situations and they will make situations happen that benefits them. They want the entire sky to be black, the sky will be black. It will be painted over and people will wonder what exactly the heck is going on. But again, it's one of those situations where their artistic vision will outpace any common sense whatsoever, and their creative vision will be driven so far into the ground that it will literally cause everything to buckle. For example, feeder example for that it ties into professional wrestling. There was this play called Spider-Man Turn Off the Dark that you might have heard about. That was a musical stage play with so many theatrical accidents and stunt issues that it was basically the professional wrestling equivalent of that. Of, like, say, I don't know. Heroes of Wrestling is often looked at as one of the worst pay-per-views ever, but I kind of disagree with that. Especially when it wasn't really the worst. It was really just a microcosm of just an independent wrestling show that somehow managed to get on pay-per-view. And some of the segments of Heroes of Wrestling were actually fairly solid. I've actually having watched it myself. When it comes to feeder, the biggest problems that you're going to have with feeder is this. They don't have the budget. They don't have the budget. They have somebody who's basically gone apocalypse now and is the mad thespian in charge of the director's chair that has gone totally Phantom of the Opera and is dropping sandbags on the production crew that he or she is paying for in ham sandwiches and false promises. And you have this situation where feeder people want to do things as cheaply as possible. They don't have the budget and they don't want to spend on the budget. So you have a situation where professional wrestling is stuck in the spectrum of, we want to increase our production values. Okay, well, you hire a production company. You actually hire a production company to help you out with the production logistics, or somebody who has experience in the production industry to make your sets and visuals better. Problem is, It's going to cost you an arm and a leg and several kidneys that you're going to have to sell on the black market in order to accomplish that goal. That's where feeder people get the little hook into you. They'll say, "Oh, I know a few friends. I know some friends who do that. I know who do set designs and costumes." It's going to cost you, though. And that's where they hook you in. And it's a situation where professional wrestling is stuck into, like I said, the three pillars of horror that their genre is being stuck into. The second of which is sport. Sport often requires regulation to be the kind of thing that is put into their general direction. They are often reliant on sport. Now, some people have called professional wrestling a sport. Some have called professional wrestling a theater. Some have called it and my mother calls it street theater because she was in the theater industry. And I think kind of am sort of in the middle that it is very active street theater. It's sport, but it's also entertainment, which we'll get to into a sec. But the sport problem in this situation is that oftentimes you will have regulation involving a sport or a union. And again, professional wrestling, some groups of professional wrestlers want to unionize. They see what SAG, which is the local one of the actors union, is able to do when it comes to monetary compensation and contracts, and they feel that, okay, well, let's ask for a union in that situation. The trouble is that have you not seen what has happened to the latest or to these sporting organizations that are supposed to provide for the athletes? Scandal, 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 more scandals, more scandals, more scandals, more scandals, more scandals, more scandals. It's not a good idea at this point in time unless you're very, very dedicated to this idea and you're very smart in how you implement it, to be doing anything involving a sporting union association. Because the word scandal has been the main topic, of course, when it comes to the idea of sporting unions. And the sport factor, of course, also is the question mark of, CTE, concussions, drugs, alcohol, all this sort of stuff that is talked about when you're talking about the sport aspect. Some people view it as a sport, but there's a cost if you want to make it theater. There's a cost if you want to make it sport. A lot of cost as far as both of those ends are concerned. With theater, you have to deal with people who are eccentric art types. And then I'm also going to talk about the two fan bases behind these two particular archetypes. The sport fan is loud, obnoxious, and probably has a blood alcohol level higher than an entire pack of horses. The art person is snobby, pretentious, wants it to be exclusive and cliche. An exclusive clique of professional wrestling, and we've had plenty of cliques over the years to showcase that this is a very bad idea. And we shall be just inclusive to ourselves, us intellectual, forward thinking individuals who believe that their art is so highest of the highest highs, that they are the Sistine Chapel, Michelangelo's beauty, wrapped in a new age deco, trippy science art that will span the test of times and climb the highest mountains and fall the greatest peaks and valleys. When people say that they want things to be better as far as a fan inclusiveness thing, I tend to not buy what they're saying because it basically means that what you're trying to do is you're trying to make wrestling more exclusive to a fan base that is already dwindling in popularity because you have a fan base that's either getting older, is passing on because of, as I talked about in the pillars of the in the episode 48 of Wacky World of Wrestling. one of the things that's not really gone and not really been said over the last few months is just the massive amount of health concerns for the wrestling fan bases overall. Regardless of which fan base you're a part of, and which side or which flag that you represent and which tabard you wear, health concerns have kind of been a major issue in the world of wrestling this year. A lot of well-known fans and personalities have had serious health issues because of the lifestyle. The lifestyles of wrestling is, that song Party All the Time? That's how some people view professional wrestling as. It's a ginormous party. With an after-party cleanup crew bill that probably wagers in the seven figures, depending on how much a city has to spend for WrestleMania weekend, for example. It's like the equivalent of an arts and sporting event. And by the by, professional wrestling sport people and professional wrestling artist people do not get along with one another. Because the sport people believe that their art is like catch wrestling, actual authentic grappling, and they are, just like the art people, extremely pretentious and angry and yelly about it when their art gets criticized by the I want it to be more like theater. And they say it, I want it to be more realistic and reality driven. Because we need another clone of the UFC, right? I say. And I go, and I'm the kind of person that would basically say to both sides, why not both? And then I would have the pitchforks and torches thrown in my general direction for even contemplating the thought of saying what we have right now is actually really good. We have a variety of choices. We have a variety of sports and arts and art deco style punk rock shows, even though a lot of them don't seem to be punk rock in the slightest. Oh, was that my dig at the British Leyland of professional wrestling? Oh, wait a minute, I'll get to them a little bit later. Yeah, so you have that. What about the third, entertainment? For those of you who may not have a monicum of any knowledge about the entertainment industry, think of the theater industry and the sports industry, and they decided to get together one night and have a child. And the horrible, horrible, horrible monster that they ended up creating, that's the entertainment industry. The entertainment industry is so seedy, corrupt, horribly, horribly, horribly done that it warps the mind. And you know that ending in in that space film, 2001: A Space Odyssey, I believe it was, where the person goes through the various different monicums of space time travel. He was basically looking at the entertainment industry and how insane it was, and that was in the 70s, where everything was going completely insane at the time. So you have wrestling stuck in these three different vices: theater, sport, and entertainment. And entertainment is basically, do me a trick, Jester. And the jester starts throwing a variety of red balls. And then somebody in the audience throws them a chainsaw. And then two chainsaws. And then a giraffe. And sooner or later, the entertainer goes completely crashing through the floor and either gets sawed to pieces by the chainsaw or crushed by the giraffe. Entertainment is such a different variety and such a different fleeting thing because entertainment covers live television and film. And WWE has been obsessed with live television and film for decades. Even if they might not necessarily be interested in doing the wrestling part of wrestling, the reason why they're trying to make themselves entertainment is entertainment in their mind is forever. Wrestling is in some kind of box that's in this other box with all the ancient relics like the Holy Grail, Pandora's box, and the Dead Sea Scrolls, the hieroglyphs of some kind of ancient civilization, you know, all the variety of different languages, the Rosetta Stone, yeah, all those ancient things. They want it to be entertainment because basically what they can say is that no, we're entertainment in this situation, which again, sport, as I talked about a little bit earlier, in a sort of an abridged way, is sport is very regulated. You know all the regulations that the that UFC has with the USDA, all the different drug testing and all the different rules and regulations that come with the game of a sport. Professional wrestling is scripted, so it's in a situation where it can't really follow the sport's mandate. They can try to mimic the style of what a sporting event looks like if it was actually legitimate, but they can't really get it down fully because everybody realizes at that point because it's scripted. Now, some people will complain about the fact of kayfabe being destroyed, being at fault. But in reality, kayfabe had to be changed and had to be either removed or taken out of the equation entirely because of the fact that it was driving everybody insane. It was like one of those brain-eating parasites from a horror movie novel or film that basically gets into your head and starts making you do crazy things. That was what was happening in the 70s, the 80s, and the 90s when it comes to professional wrestling. And in a roundabout way, they wanted to stop that. They wanted it to be more open, which is exactly the kind of way that professional wrestling needed to go, is they needed to be more open. They needed to be open, they needed to be logical, and they needed to be honest. That yes, honesty in professional wrestling. What a concept. What an unusual concept. So when you have this situation, you have the free masters that wrestling is stuck in this perilous position where they are stuck right in the middle, trying to be the master for theater, trying to be the master for sport, and trying to be the master for global media entertainment that is done on film. Now, film entertainment and theater entertainment that's done on a stage, they don't get along with each other either. They don't like TV, those talky flicks people. And the entertainment people don't like those hokey theater people. Now, the entertainment side of things, they have more money than the theater people do. So it's always this. So it's now you have the indie art people clashing with the rich media mogul types, which is always humorous to see those two basically slap fight each other in the face. Because it's humorous entertainment. In a way, it becomes entertainment in of itself. Wrestling on the spectrum of the entertainment industry is actually relatively clean compared to most of them. Sure, there are the issues with CTE, wrestlers' deaths, health insurance, unionization, Donner Party incidents in professional wrestling, but all the other stuff. All of that is a monicum of minor compared to, say, something like the filming of Apocalypse Now, or any other film that was done in the 1970s that basically falls under the category of troubled production. So when I hear people saying this or people saying that about professional wrestling and trying to do all these different things, I have to remind you. Remember that example of the person climbing the mountain with the iron sword and the iron shield and all this metal and during a lightning storm, raising their sword high in the air, hoping it would imbue them with magical powers? Yeah, basically think back to that example again. So these three situations. And you have a situation where WWE is tied into a position where they have 45 to 55 million reasons to go forward with this event. And look, it's either going to be a total disaster that they don't do this thing, or it's going to be a total disaster that they do this thing. Regardless of what exactly happens in this situation, like I said last week, grab your popcorn, get a beverage of your choice, hopefully non-alcoholic, and just watch the fireworks as this slow-moving train wreck either happens or doesn't happen on November 2nd. But then there's another pay-per-view to talk about, and I'm gonna talk about that one, and it's certainly a mystery. It's WWE Evolution, and I'm gonna be bringing it up right now because okay, Evolution. No, it's not the theory of evolution. No, it's not the It's not Charles Darwin's theory of evolution. It's not the stable evolution. It is an all women's pay per view. All women's championship will be featured event of the event. It will also feature the finals of the Mae Young Classic tournament. So this is this is happening in Uniondale, New York, at the Nassau Veterans Memorial Conversation. and Nassau Veterans Memorial Coliseum. And it's WWE's first ever all women's event. And with a theme song of Salute by Little Mix. Okay. Let's see here. So we have 7 matches lined up so far, and I'm going to go a little bit in depth when it gets actually it's about almost due, so we don't hardly have to worry about that. So we have Rhea Ripley versus TBA for the NXT UK Women's Championship. We have Kairi Sane versus Shayna Baszler for the NXT Women's Championship. Becky Lynch versus Charlotte Flair. Ronda Rousey versus Nikki Bella. Io Shirai versus Toni Storm. Trish Stratus and Lita versus Alexa Bliss and Mickie James. And a battle royale for a women's championship match between Alicia Fox, Asuka, Billie Kay, Carmella, Dana Brooks, Ember Moon, Lana, Mandy Rose, Naomi, Nia Jax, who's still here, Patriot Royce, Sonya Deville, Tamina, and Tori Wilson. Apparently, Tori Wilson is going to be in this. So, okay. This actually looks like a really solid card, and there's not a lot I can really say about this card, apart from the fact that it's really interesting to me. So you might be thinking to yourself, well, what exactly is the match you're looking forward to most? And I've been meaning to talk about the women's division a little bit because, again, as we move away from the WWE as a monopoly thing, see, they are a microeconomy. What they are basically running at this point for Evolution, they're running a Shimmer show. And I know people are going to be saying, well, Shimmer should deserve all the credit for laying the foundation and brickwork. And I'll stop you there and I'll say, Shimmer, more times than not, has ended up in a situation where the wrestling itself hadn't paid the bills. Oh boy. Yeah, there's a lot of sleaziness and questionable business practices involved with Shimmer. Again, like any Chicago outfit. Like anytime I see the words owned by people from Chicago, Illinois, I go, all right, when's the St. Valentine's Day Massacre going to happen? What are you going to do this time that's going to make me completely roll my eyes in the back of my head and then spin them around 28,000 times? This time, Chicago. Your biggest professional wrestling event that's ever been held in your city that was not a WWE event was done by two guys from California and a guy from Georgia. No Chicagoans were involved apart from Pro Wrestling Tees. And those are t-shirt printers. So really, and it's not really a situation where I'm really trusting a t-shirt printer to do logical, sane business decisions. So, of the 7 matches on this card, so Alexa Bliss is going to be the one that takes the pinfall against Trish Stratus and Lita, and Mickie James and Trish and Lita are going to have themselves a match. Io Shirai versus Toni Storm. I don't really have a lot of expectations for this. I've been meaning to talk about the Mae Young Classic, and I'll probably talk about that on the next episode or so, because I need to catch up on some things. And anybody who knows about this, they already know about the final because the final was taped. The finals were set weeks in advance. Then there's Rhea Ripley versus TBA. Once again, people knew about this. Spoilers. They're just bringing their young champion onto the card. Then we have the NXT Women's Championship, which is Kairi Sane versus Shayna Baszler. Not really all that excited about it, but again, it's interesting that you're bringing in 2 MMA people into this card in form of Rousey and Baszler in order to get some views. Lynch versus Flair has been a Terry Funk, Ric Flair style feud, which has just been a good feud overall. And I may be underplaying it, and I may be overplaying it, but I tend to stay relatively middle of the road, as you might have noticed, when it comes to the women's division, because a lot of people, they pour their heart and soul into women's wrestling, and they get obsessive compulsive to the point of, have you had a restraining order filed on you? I ask, is my question. Whereas for me, I go, oh, this looks solid. Let's see how it goes. Oh, this is solid. Oh, let's see how this goes. I'm really looking forward to Rousey versus Bella because that has the potential to be Vader versus Nobuhiro Takayama Takeda, good levels of match. Because you have Nikki Bella, who is literally a person who watches every single strong style match she can get a hold of. And then you have Rousey, who basically is the Nobuhiro Takeda of this match. Then you have, and I know people are complaining about the promo, but the thing is, what they wanted to do in this situation is they wanted to incorporate the realism factor again. That they're trying to make this reality era MMA stuff. Again, if you want to blame somebody for how promos are inappropriate or such, blame UFC, because a lot of their promos are relatively inappropriate. Because again, that's how they sell fights. They sell these two crazy people who may or may not have been in the correctional facility prison yard at some point, punch each other for real in the face. Or try to rip each other's arms off for real in the face. And it becomes a situation where you just wonder what exactly the heck is going on in that situation. And like, okay. So you have Bella versus Rousey. Got a lot of people rooting for Nikki Bella. You got a lot of people rooting for Ronda Rousey. And it's just this really interesting. It actually builds up to a championship match. It builds up the championship match in that situation. And then you also have in this situation, you have Shayna Baszler on the same card as Nikki Bella, as Ronda Rousey. So that's a really interesting stipulation. Then you have Lynch versus Flair. Again, that should be a really interesting match. Shirai versus Storm is a match I have the concerns about because both of them have injuries coming into this match. Toni Storm had some injury concerns from being on tour, and Shirai is always a situation where you're basically praying, okay, please don't break your neck on something this time. Because Shirai has had neck issues before. She's cleared now, and she's going to be facing against Toni Storm for the Mae Young Classic Tournament Finals match. Which basically means that she's either going to be competing for the Women's Championship for NXT or the NXT UK Women's Championship. Then we have the Battle Royale, which I think is going to be really fun. And it's just like it's a very interesting situation. So basically this was announced on July 23rd, and basically this was an event that was so compare that to Crown Jewel, and only 3 matches have been announced so far, as well as the World Cup. So, okay, so that's really interesting. It's really so. Right now, we currently have announced card of Roman Reigns versus Brock Lesnar versus Braun Strowman for the Universal Championship, the Beef Jerky Championship of Champions. AJ Styles versus Daniel Bryan, and D-Generation X versus the Brothers of Destruction. So this is very interesting. It's very interesting because I feel as though that you have Evolution. Evolution could end up being the event that is actually done on WWE cards, and Crown Jewel might end up being the one that's not done. Which again, it's like, okay. But then there's also the creeping voice that is going in the back of your head saying, what exactly is going to happen at Evolution that's going to mess things up? Because again, this is WWE, and unless you have a humorous skit where Stephanie McMahon enters the Women's Battle Royale and proceeds to get promptly chucked into the 5th row, what exactly is going to happen at Evolution? And then you ask yourself the question, if Crown Jewel actually happens, what's going to happen at Crown Jewel? Again, it's a really awkward situation on both sides of the equation. If things don't go exactly as perfect in Evolution, you're going to get a lot of cries from people saying worst pay-per-view ever. And it's not even to do with anything involving the women's matches themselves. It's just that everybody's going to have such a high expectation about Evolution that they're going to literally explode if they don't get exactly what they want. Some of them want Nikki Bella to win the title over Rousey and to start a feud with her for the belt. Some want Sasha Banks to have a singles match on this card. Others, because like they deserve it and they deserve credit. Like, remember what I've said about credit in past episodes. You really do not want credit, because all credit is going to be a burden on you. Because if things go wrong, guess who's got the credit? What if things go right? Well, again, you should be modest and humble about that. You shouldn't be a situation where I demand credit because I did this or that or the other thing. I'm like, okay, you did this, you achieved this thing. Good for you. Now let's move on to the next pillar and to the next pillar and see if we can build from that. Oftentimes everybody just thinks about, oh well, we got that one thing done, we got that one pillar done, we got that one credit done. And they don't think about moving forward. They basically think about just sticking it out and just staying in that one spot because they gained that one credit. Okay. And that's where you run into this situation with Evolution. Is Evolution going to be a success? Is Evolution going to be a failure? Is Crown Jewel going to be a controversy-filled fireworks show? Is Crown Jewel not going to be a controversy-filled fireworks show? Regardless of its... Again, I just find the mere concept, if this is possible, that they decided to sign an agreement with WWE. This partnership, it's like, okay, so this is awkward. And, eh, like I said, this is an awkward situation. So what about, like I was talking about earlier, the WWE is a microeconomy. It's not a monopoly, it's a microeconomy. Basically, what WWE does is that they are basically an sort of a they're basically the bank for professional wrestling. If your wrestling promotion has gone over budget, or you have expenses with arena promotions and talent and all this other kind of stuff, you go to WWE, you signed a deal with them, like Progress and ICW have done, and maybe your stuff ends up on the WWE network. But I think that there's also that hesitation at this point, because here's the problems. It's not on anything on WWE's doing. They're actually doing a very sensible thing at this point. They're going, guys, have you been using copyrighted music on your shows that we can't afford to play back? See, that's the first problem. A lot of these iPay-per-views used a lot of copyrighted music that they might not be able to broadcast internationally. If they, say, for instance, decided to broadcast a Progress show, they would have to do a lot of reworking, similar to how they've done the ECW shows on the network, and they'd have to get rid of the copyrighted music because they couldn't afford to pay for that. But WWE can afford to pay for those things. No, they can't. A lot of their money is tied up in stocks, bonds, CDs, and every other deal and business dealing you can think of. That Saudi money that we mentioned earlier is the only money that is not really tied up in anything. It's just cold hard cash. Cold hard, 45 to 55 million. Not tied up in any investments or stocks. All it's tied up in is a 10-year deal, which again is an awkward arranged marriage, which I think both parties at this point kind of want to get away from. But in the case of, at this point, Progress, ICW, and potentially a business partnership with WXW in Germany, because WXW has had some managerial changes over the last couple of weeks at this point. Their head honcho, Christian Michael Jacoby, has had to take a leave of absence due to health reasons. And again, I wish him the best in his health recovery at this point, going forward. But you've got these three promotions all looking at the possibility of having WWE invest in them. And WWE is basically an investor. They're not a company that completely controls them. Basically, they are just the lord over which that the rest of these promotions are the vassals. And only two that they've signed so far are ICW and Progress. And Rev Pro has gone in the opposite direction and has decided to serve the shogun known as New Japan Pro Wrestling, which is having their own market share problems. This is going to get a little bit on the complicated side, possibly for this next discussion, and it might go a little bit on the random side, but here's what the situation is. First, let's look at Progress. Progress is a UK-based promotion that basically has this punk rock aesthetic that I kind of don't see any sort of punk rock in the slightest. I've watched a couple of their shows. I watched Chapter 13. I've watched a variety of their promos of how they promoted. They just did their giant Wembley show. But here's the problem. Progress is spending an awful lot of money on 42 shows this year. No, that's not the center. Do they literally think that they're the center of the universe? Because that's the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy reference. 42 shows, and that also includes the co-promoted shows with other promotions. And Progress doesn't have the roster to do a touring show roster. WXW has a touring show roster. They have wrestlers that don't show up on the pay-per-view events, or the WXW Now live events that they have, that are on the touring shows. They have a touring show roster. Progress doesn't have a touring show roster. What they have is a minimum 25 to 30 person roster, and they have some people who are outsiders who are from other promotions, and it really messed them up with the Wembley show, the Hello Wembley edition of Progress. See, Zack Sabre Jr. had a commitment to New Japan to do a show. Will Ospreay, same boat. They had to get rid of some of their matches because of that. Because of the New Japan commitments, because now they suddenly can't use New Japan talent on their shows. Or if they can, it has to do some kind of agreement and asking WWE to maybe give them some more money. Because what they did is they did a United States tour, and guess what? One of their performers, Kid Lycos, got injured during the tour. In the continuing saga of CCK constantly gets injured in these big events, and now they've had to go with the original pairing of CCK, which is Jonathan Gresham and Chris Brooks. Jonathan Gresham currently signed to Ring of Honor. And Chris Brooks, who is currently a independent wrestler who is affiliated mostly with Rev Pro. This is going to get awkward really fast. All these different allegiances and factions and shogun clans, whatever you call them, in whatever medieval terms that you call them. It's going to get very awkward very soon. Because what's happened in this situation is that World of Sport came back. ITV had their abridged run with World of Sport that turned out to be something of a ratings disaster, and Rev Pro has also got a TV deal lined up in place. So we've got a situation where we have a variety of different promotions and a variety of different peoples and things, and they're all coming together into the British industry, which is now basically being financially supported by the Americans and the Germans. Kind of like how British Leyland was being supported by the variety of companies. Because, see, for those of you who may not know their car history, British Leyland was one of the largest car conglomerates in Britain. See, this is where I don't necessarily think of WWE as a monopoly. They're not British Leyland. British Leyland was also one of the biggest disaster shows in the automaking industry in the 1970s, where build quality was questionable, rust proofing was a fancy option, and 1970s British Leyland cars had a lot of issues. There were some good cars of that bunch, but there were a lot of questions. So Progress, who I've called the British Leyland of professional wrestling at this point, because remember what I said about theater people? Well, a theater person is one of the three people running Progress, Glenn Joseph. He's involved in the theater industry, and it shows. Progress shows are extremely cheap, short-staffed, and don't have a lot of people running key critical elements of their promotion. Their roster is extremely thin, and it relies heavily on a lot of international American imports, German imports, and other imports from other countries in order to function properly. It's got that punk rock aesthetic of everything is completely rushed. And then, of course, there are the injuries, the questionable bookings, and the scandals that have affected Progress in the last year or so. From the scandal that affected the London Riots, one of their most decorated tag teams, when one of their tag members was Strangler Davis, was revealed to have an affair with a minor. Oops. Or when some of their undercard talent was also revealed to be having inappropriate affairs with people. Oops. Or the allegations of physical violence and inappropriate behavior from the Progress Dojo, the Pro Dojo. Oops. From the blacklisting of one of their performers, Pollyanna, because of apparently she was sexually harassed allegedly by individuals from Progress Wrestling and blacklisted by wrestlers like Will Ospreay. Oops. How very British of you all that you seem to have this ability to take a very good situation and completely knacker it up because you decided that, oh, we want to do this way. We are believing ourselves to be party time all the time. Could have did Adam Rose. The gimmick consumed him. And he ends up beating his wife with a domestic violence charge. See what I mean about the vices of professional wrestling consuming people? Adam Rose is a classic example of that. The gimmick literally consumed him, and he literally became the party man. And like a lot of parties, it ends badly, and with the cops showing up. And a bathtub somehow in someone's front yard. And the car embedded into a tree. Yeah, Perilous Pitfalls. Kind of fits into the subtitle right there. So Progress is now in a very bad position where they are basically the British equivalent of ECW. Now, the British equivalent of ECW on the booking side of things is ICW, which has taken every single goodwill that they had over the last several years, and like most things Scottish, has literally catapulted it like a Scottish bagpipesman catapulting a load of haggis onto onto the roof of its neighbor, which it despises. Yeah, at least he didn't draw out his Scottish claymore and attempted to slay the man to death, or anything like that. Just dumped a bunch of haggis with a man-made catapult. Yeah, ICW has basically taken the ECW booking elements and has gone completely insane, as Scottish promotions with the Highlander aesthetic are wont to do. The Irish seemingly have been the most sane of the bunch, with OTT actually having some really solid production values, and the Walter versus Jordan Devlin feud, which has been really good. And then there's Progress, which again tries to put itself at the heap of the industry by saying, we're the richest one. Oh, well, you're the one that has the most problems. Alleged sex scandals, which may be real or not, depends, okay? These are all allegations, no charges have... Like, the thing is, with everything that's going on in Britain right now, with Brexit and everything else that's going on politically, Progress finds itself in a really weird position where the biggest influencers at this point is an American wrestling company, much like how Ford had to bail out Land Rover, Jaguar, and other companies when they bought them in the 1980s. It wasn't a situation where it was sustainable for the local populace to control these various different manufacturers because production quality wasn't all that good. You know, you can talk about so many different jokes with 80s Range Rovers and their build quality issues. And that's the same thing with Progress, who's now had to ally themselves. Like, half of their card was actually provided by WXW, a company that actually has a solid foundation, that actually is built like a professional touring promotion, which Progress attempted to be this year. I mean, they had a jump of events to 42. Now, I can understand the Australian promotions and the co-promotions and the German co-promotions and some of the American co-promotions, but really, guys and gals, 42 shows over the span of a year, and you don't have the roster for it, and you keep using your performers in such ways that basically make anybody who has any sort of logical sense in their head spin. Like, for instance, not pushing Jack Sexsmith to be your LGBT pansexual champion for a promotion that basically promotes itself as an alternative, we are inclusive to everyone promotion. Or the factor that you have botched the Chuck Mambo push at this point. Or the botched push for Travis Banks to be this Roman Reigns-esque champion and then he gets his shoulder hurt. Or the complete botching of the South Pacific Power Trip as a whole as a stable. Or the overabundance and overuse of British Strong Style because they've got WWE contracts. or or trying to put TK Cooper, again, another person who was in that South Pacific power trip, putting him in the Atlas division, which is for the super heavyweights, because some of your super heavyweights got signed to World of Sport for this whole ITV World of Sport reboot. To all the things that are happening in Britain right now, where it's basically become the equivalent of the War of the Roses, or any other conflict that you can think of that is British Civil War like, or the Goths facing against or the Celts facing against the Romans. Medieval history, you wouldn't expect that on Wacky World of Wrestling now, would you? But yeah, Perilous Pitfalls. And I haven't even gotten to the rest of I've talked about the indies in America beforehand. I know a lot of people say that, oh, some people should go in the theater direction, and some people should go in the sport direction, and some people should go in the entertainment direction. I mean, what exactly is entertainment? It's kind of just a grab bag of variety of horrors, you know, that may or may not work as intended. It's kind of the thing with professional wrestling. It may or may not work as intended. A lot of times it turns out to be a success, and a lot of times it turns out to be an absolute catastrophic failure. And you can be pragmatic about it, you can be pessimistic about it, you can be positive about it, but like, here's the thing. Here's the thing. We as a group, or I consider myself as a group at least, I consider myself the person the lowest of the lowest on the totem pole. I am just a professional wrestling fan who happens to have a microphone here, who is involved in wrestling media, who is involved as a kind of sort of wrestling personality, who somehow has most of his marbles. I guess you would call it that, even though I'm bringing a lot of logic, a lot of sanity, and a lot of just basic, okay, that will happen. Okay, that will happen too. It's not based out of any emotions or passion or anything like that, because passion can lead you to some really dangerous places. And and unchecked emotion, you can be emotional about some things, but only if it's a really serious situation. Professional wrestling is scripted. I know where my place right now is in the professional wrestling hierarchy. Or heck, even if I don't look at it as a hierarchy at all and just basically look at it from professional wrestling perspective, I'm not a professional wrestler. And my involvement in the pro wrestling media is relatively limited at this point. And my involvement as a wrestling personality is only limited by the 240 characters on the Twitter account or the community that I'm a part of in the wrestling world. And then you have, and then as a wrestling fan, I really go in a different direction than a lot of people go in the professional wrestling circles. I try to find the most random of random Japanese indies. I try to go to local events in my local wrestling region promotion. I think I've done probably the most good in that area this year. I've definitely taken a big step back this year as far as podcasting is concerned, and I really like these solo shows that I've been doing. And like I said last episode, I'm glad I kind of found my voice again. Because you wouldn't be finding this voice anywhere else. Because now this is my own show, my own podcast. But I'm also mindful of that the what this means in the grand scheme of professional wrestling is, quite frankly, very little. I have some good opinions, which, again, feel free to steal if you're in a bigger position than I am. Because I'm not in a position right now to really do anything of grandiose change or anything like that. And it's something I probably should have realized a few years ago. I'm not in any grand position to do any sort of grand, massive changes. What I can do is I can offer advice, which sometimes is taken and sometimes is not. And as much as I enjoy teaching people how to podcast, and as much as I enjoy doing podcasts, which again, something I enjoy doing, is something for fun. And I may have lost that. I may have lost that temporarily, the idea that this was fun somewhere along the line. And this is fun to me again. This is fun. This series 2 stretch that I've had and the guests that I've brought on board has been incredibly fun. And I've paced myself this year. I really have tried to pace myself for my own health this year. My voice is considerably better this year than it was last. And I'm not having to run the mental arithmetic of trying to set a schedule up that is appropriate, where I can basically just do this podcast 6 out of 7 days if I really wanted to. But I think the next episode will be coming in maybe like about 6 to 7 days, depending on what happens. I had some free time this week, which allowed me to do this podcast. And it is 1:03 a.m. in the morning as I'm recording this. And I talked about the awkward situation with the WWE and KSA. I talked about the situation. I'm going to check 1 second here. So, overall, this has been a fairly interesting episode of Wacky World of Wrestling because there's been a lot of discussion. I tend to go I tend to go with the philosophy direction when it comes to professional wrestling, and for me that's kind of the biggest thing. And I what I say in these situations is that there is pitfalls in every solution that has been imagined because the individuals who are talking about these various different solutions that they want, they don't do enough homework and they don't do enough research into seeing these promotions actually being made into reality. Which is, again, the thing that a lot of people try to avoid as far as talking about professional wrestling. What is the reality of the situation? Well, they signed a 10-year contract to have this show on November 2nd. Okay. If it was, like I said, if it was the KSA that approached them, then it's on them that they decided to sign up with an American company that has a lot of craziness about them. Um, and so it's really interesting, the world of professional wrestling as I see it at this point in time, because 2018 has been basically the year of the gauntlet. There's a lot of decay, maybe even some death and destruction and whatnot, and everybody trying to basically go, oh, well, I can't have that. I might as well destroy it. Then nobody benefits. Nobody. Nothing constructive. Where did the word constructivism come from? Because wrestling, all I see it is either people wanting to be very destructive and set everything on fire, or people just moping about how things would never change and everything is bad and everything is horrible and all will be bad forever. I don't view it like that. I go, okay, okay, if you feel like you can't do anything to change things, let somebody else try it, a hand at it. And I'm not some kind of egomaniac that says, oh, I can do this. Look at my resume. I've done the impossible before. And well, because of the way that this year's been going, I feel pretty healthy. And I've now done my second podcast with Miss Brand New Logo, which again is off centered on a live broadcast, and I'm probably going to be changing that in post production. But wow. Might also be doing a little bit more work on the finished logo for the episode. But yeah, I think this is an episode that's gone fairly well. It's 1:06 a.m. in the morning, and this has been of Screaming Sands and Perilous Pitfalls. I'm trying to keep these episodes to around an hour, and I know this might not necessarily be the kind of episode that most people were expecting for. I think everybody was expecting me to be like a total grilling of this whole situation with Saudi Arabia and WWE, but no, I'm more neutral about this whole thing, and I kind of go, oh, well, this is not surprising in the slightest if you know anything about ancient medieval history, which I'm a big, big fan of and have studied extensively. You want to ask about the Dark Ages? Well, wrestling is kind of in a golden age, but also kind of in a dark age at this point. A lot of people with a lot of ideas who are going they are going the route of a mad interpretive artist. And I haven't even touched on New Japan, which has a lot of issues of in itself. And then you also have, let's continue on with the microeconomy at this point, to continue on with that point. So WWE is essentially basically being a vassal state and is now putting a lot of investment money into Progress, into ICW, and possibly into WXW if things go forward with business deals. And I know people are saying, well, they're monopolizing professional wrestling and everything, and one little special Stardom, poor Stardom is suffering because of a talent raid. Like, have you not heard of the horror stories about Stardom? Seems to me like WWE is actually rescuing some of these Joshi wrestlers from the 7 levels of hell that is Stardom wrestling. Much the same way as somebody rescuing somebody from Progress. Look at the promotions that you're supporting. Ask yourself this tough question. Are they being morally right? Do they have the moral principles to do the right things? Because as satanically evil as WWE is, as I've said in the past, at least they're being honest about being diabolically evil. Can you say that about the Indies? Can you say that about Impact? Well, Impact has honestly been honest about their situation over the past year or so since the new ownership took over. Is Ring of Honor and their questionable corporate partnership, are they being honest? Are they being honest? Are they being truthful about what they are doing? Because every promotion you will look at in the world of professional wrestling has some form of skeletons, has some hidden bodies in a graveyard somewhere in the middle of the woods. It's just WWE has a tourist sign right in front of theirs and says, here's our horror stories of bad, horrific PR and everything else that's happened. Here's our latest exhibit that has a lot of sand in it. Anakin Skywalker is not welcomed. And the sand screams and yells at you. Because there's 4,000 years plus of ancient history in that screaming sands. And then you have the Perilous Pitfalls. WWE is investing a lot of money into these promotions. If these promotions fail, and again, the ideology of, WWE is a monopoly, it's too big to fail. Do you realize that Sears filed for bankruptcy this week? Sears, one of the cornerstones of discount retail, or upper end high class retail, a company that's been around since 1890 or so. They filed for bankruptcy this week. Think about that before you start saying that a company that's set in stone is truly immortal, brother. Because they aren't. Nobody is. And the reality I have in facing this situation is that, wow, I've gotten deep with the philosophical stuff today. It's kind of cool, honestly, when you get deep like this. So yeah, this has been of Screaming Sands and Perilous Pitfalls. I may not have necessarily gone into detail as much as I wanted to with some of the topics. I'll have to play back and see what exactly I went through this week. But when you get into the zone of talking about things, it's like you kind of just sort of lose track of yourself. And it's 1:11 a.m. in the morning. I've been doing this for about an hour and maybe about 12 minutes, I think it was. I started around 11:30, I think it was 11:50. So yeah, I've been doing this for over an hour. So for those of you who are tuning in, thank you so much for tuning in. For those of you who may not necessarily be aware, I put up a fan post on episode 51, which is basically a recap page where you can copy and paste the titles of the episodes to search what you want. You can also look at the 14 Fizzpatrick YouTube channel. That's FITZZPATRICK. RICK, that has these episodes hosted on it. And this is episode 52. So if you're looking on, and also look at my Twitter page at Fizzpatrick14. That's William Fitzpatrick on the Twitters. And episode 53 probably is going to be talking about the Mae Young Classic next time around, because we need to get deep into that tournament of Joshi Death. Because it's a very interesting tournament, and it is a very interesting so-called for the so-called monopoly of WWE. They're actually done a women's tournament really well. And we'll see what the second edition of the Mae Young Classic has over the first. And like I said, I'm not trying to compare. I'm trying to not compare the two of them, because they're basically doing the same thing. Bringing a lot of unknown people into the WWE universe. Here's your complimentary robe, your sacrificial knight, and your free goat. I'm not sure which had a complimentary Daniel Bryan beard on it. And we have our specialty yellow and black robe for those of you going to the Cult of Full Sail and Full Sail University to worship our almighty Lord Triple H and its mighty kingdom of Isengard. Johnny Gargano is evil. Tommaso Ciampa is good because he's not conformist to the Cult of Full Sail. Yes, I'll have more talkings about NXT, because they've got a War Games card coming up in a couple of weeks here as well. War Games 2. Hopefully this War Games doesn't put me to legitimate sleep. Oh, you put Adam Cole in the War Games match again. Oh, well, there goes that plan out the window. Anywho, this is William Fitzpatrick. And have a good day or night, ladies and gentlemen. And this roller coaster of a year I've been having continues. And I'll continue on with episode 53 of Wacky World of Wrestling. This one will probably be a bit more focused on the wrestling part instead of geopolitical politics, weird philosophy things, and the perilous pitfalls of professional wrestling, and the screaming, blinding sands that consume us all. Have a good day or night, ladies and gentlemen, and hopefully this last part didn't cause any form of major nightmares. Bye!